All right. Well, welcome back to this week's episode of MVP Podcast. We've got Mighty Pete all the way here from Ireland, property manager, big into real estate investing, but very big in mindset. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about his book that he's written, some influences in his mindset and how it helped his real estate career. But before we jump into all of that, we're going to find out who the Mighty Pete is. So I start the show off the same way every time. Just a little bit of a background of where you came from in terms of your personal or business and what led you into the success you have now, running it sounds like two companies.
Yeah. Well, listen, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. It's always great to meet new people and listen, to be able to get out there and hear new things. So yeah, so my name is Mighty Pete. Pete Lonton is my full sort of official title per se. I am also the host of the Fire in the Belly show. I'm a best-selling author, a TEDx speaker, a mentor, entrepreneur, property investor, husband and father of three beautiful girls. So that's the headlines, if you like. So really my background is in property. So I started investing in property 21 years ago. I'll save you the math. I'm currently 41. I started when I was 20. I now sort of invest predominantly in residential properties. So what we would call here in Ireland and the UK, it's buy to let. So that's residential property, sort of long-term rent. So super simple, probably the most basic of strategies, but that's worked well for me over, like I say, 21 years. Been through a lot in my life and done some amazing things, but also really had some tough spots too, to be honest, sort of from periods of depression, business downturns, losing the business, and spent a long time not stoking my own fire in my belly, and it all kind of came to a head for me in 2017. And at 37 and a half years of age, I got to a point when actually enough was enough. And I went through a period in my life where it all had to change, and it did. And really, that's where we are now, sort of 4.5 years on, where actually before it used to be, mindset was okay. I previously, it was a case of just work harder. If you need to achieve more, just work harder, just push harder. Really, since then, I've realized it's all mindset is everything. And everything has changed really since doing that. And my life has taken a massive pivot. And listen, we are where we are today. So many beautiful things have happened, like I say, from the show, from the book, and so many things that I'm doing. I do a lot of talks, I do a lot of seminars, business workshops. Intuitive coaching is probably one of my strengths as well. And really just getting out there. So that's a bit of a whistle stop tour of who I am, what I do. So happy to talk about any or all of it as serves you guys, and that's what it's all about. So it's I just appreciate being here. It's very grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, we're excited. Like I was telling you before the show, the farthest guest we've had, I know it's digital, but me being in real estate, like I am excited to pick your brain on how real estate in Ireland works, because obviously it's all dictated by the law, and I'm sure we've got some differences going on. But before we get into the X's and O's of that, one thing, because I know that a lot of our audience is, they could be held back by something. I can't do that because I don't have money, or I can't do that because my job right now is just taking up too much of my time. I've got too many kids. I can't take on the risk. Did you think you said you started at 21?
20 years
at
of
20.
age. Mm-hmm.
Did you think at 20 that you were going to own a portfolio of real estate and be a mindset coach for thousands and thousands of people?
No, I didn't. I really didn't. And that's the thing. But listen, this is the beauty, and this is what property is all about. It's about compounding, compounding in effort, compounding in financials, compounding in, the time spent. And listen, I sacrificed a lot for, periods of my life. I put in a hell of a lot of work, to make it happen. I've been through one recession and now a pandemic as well, and we've stayed pretty bulletproof in terms of our investment strategy. So listen, did I know where I was going to go? No, I didn't. Frankly, up to the age of 37 and a half, I didn't know what I was doing. I was working hard. I did everything at full throttle. and I burnt the candle both ends and in the middle, so it wasn't for lack of effort. But I think, like a lot of people in life, you do get to the eventual stage of going, what's it all about? And there
Yeah.
is a point when effort and energy alone will not take you all the way. You get to the stage when you got to get smarter. You can't work any harder. And that's where I got to. I physically couldn't do any more. And to the point I was actually burning out. So that's when I had to get smarter. And
Hmm.
understanding now, listen, I sort of say to a lot of people, I mean, I could teach you everything I know about property probably in, over a couple of weeks, and you'll know everything I've learned in 20 odd years, but the difference is mindset. If that property strategy itself is probably 5%, mindset is 95%. You get the mindset
Yeah.
right, and it's totally different. I mean, I've met the likes of Grant Cardone, some real big real estate investors. Had a beautiful chance to sit around the table with them and talk real estate strategies. And do you know what? That's some of the beauty. That's the opportunities that I've had, and get to see people out there and see what's going on. So I'm super grateful for that.
Yeah.
It's
That's
not pretty,
an
but
awesome thing that you were able to do. Sit down with Grant Cardone. He's like the mythical creature that I see on podcasts, and I listen to his podcast. He is like the one person I'm like, man, if I could ever be like him, because I feel like he's got the X's O and the mindset. So, but he's always a guest on Bigger Pockets podcast, which is what I listen to here while I'm on the road. He comes on quite frequently. So he was one of the big names that kind of hit me in the face as I started real estate. And I was like, all right, there's a guy that I like his mindset. And like you said, his X's and O's are great, but his mindset is amazing. It's the X's and O's are great, but when you're sitting on a job site and you've got 10 different directions you can take something, you've got to take all that information in and just trust you're going to make a great choice. And sometimes your great choice is to back off. We've had a couple projects where you're in the middle of it and you're like, our best solution is to dump this and get out. And those are
yeah,
super hard because that's tugging at your ego where you're like, no, I can work harder. We can make this work. And sometimes it just doesn't work. And that's not a failure. That's a success. You just avoided a failure. And that's the mindset stuff that, I mean, when I was in athletics, I was work harder. And then I hit a point where I was like, maybe I don't have to work harder, but I do have to work smarter. And it's finding out efficiency. But I think efficiency is more of a mindset thing as well. But I'm going to look to you to tell me that one, because you are, I'm sure, levels ahead of me in mindset. So if we can dive into your book, what was your basis about why you started it? Was it to inspire others? Was it had you done research and this is what you came up with? What was the background behind the story in your book?
Do you know, it's kind of unusual because around 4 odd years ago, whilst I was having what I call my midlife opportunity, you can call it a crisis if you wish. I now look at it
That's
as,
mindset right there.
it was an opportunity, right? And
Yep.
there was some pretty rough days that, I'm open to saying that, and as a guy, I don't mind talking about mental health. That's something that's really quite key. But for me, it got to the stage where this is kind of where fire in the belly, because I was sitting there asking the question, saying, how is it that some people, listen, get up every morning and go and take over the world, and other people get up and just turn over the TV or turn over and go back to sleep? What's the difference? Why do some of us, really want to excel in life and decide that enough is enough and move on, and some people don't? And I was really just curious to know, because I was at that stage. I physically couldn't work any harder. I'd bang my head off the wall. Like I say, I was working like a dog, and yet we were losing the business, and I could not stop that. And then we had young kids as well, so there was sleep deprivation thrown in on top, and that's enough to put anyone mad, the sleep deprivation alone. So you have that, and then you have expectations, and I'm sitting here going, I'm so busy, but I don't know, am I doing what I love? No, I don't know what I want, and truly I was just lost in my passion, lost in my purpose, lost in everything else. Couldn't work any harder. And I was just totally confused. And then you get the likes of Grant Cardone and a lot of the UK investors, and I get the opportunity to speak with a lot of them, and you're sitting there going, here's guys that are talking about, hundreds and thousands of developments and properties or things that are going on, and I'm sitting here and struggling, going, how do I get the next one? And this is the one thing, it just totally confused me. But from that, one thing that kept coming into my head is going, what's someone's, we talk about these gut instincts, and we talk about, what drives you, what's your passion, what's your fire in your belly, what's this, and I just kept rambling through my head. And like I say, this was a really sort of fairly, there's a great saying that I love, is really from your darkest hour comes your brightest moment. And there's always, quite often it's the point when enough is enough. And I had that, and the sort of the turning point for me in there, which I talked about a lot in my TEDx talk, and it was there is, when you decide enough is enough. It's when you make a decision, when it's no longer acceptable to say, I'm willing to keep holding on to this situation, that actually something must change. And that's a huge part in there. But really where I was sort of moving on to is saying that actually, I then got curious and saying, what makes you different? What makes the next person different? What makes that person, the man, woman, entrepreneur, actor, whoever, I mean, what makes them tick? How is it that they decide to get up and keep, going to practice, trying more, trying again, failing, trying, failing, trying? And, really, what was that all about? And that's when literally Fire in the Belly came about, because I know I could, it was non-political, it was geographical. And I could say to you, really, Marcus, what's your fire in your belly? And you would have a passion that means something to you and a purpose and where you are in your life. And I could then talk to somebody else from the other side of the world, and talk to them. And they would say, and it could be, and I've met people really, and this is what happened. So originally I was going to do a book. It was ironic because at the same time I was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. So this was quite late on. So like I say, I'm 41, so 37, 38 is when I was diagnosed.
Well, so 38 years you lived with dyslexia and you had no idea what was going on.
It was kind of almost like a running joke. But this is the thing, especially with dyslexia and ADHD, is actually what happens is the brain is clever enough to compensate. So we compensate and we disguise. Now that can be compensating in terms of hard work. So you may be weak in some spot, but actually what you do is you work longer, harder, faster. You do certain things that, and it's not, dyslexia is always a funny one. And I like to explain it that it's not that you can't read or write, because I can. I'm below average in terms of IQ, in terms of reading and writing. It's just something I will never do for leisure or pleasure, so I can do it. But then you say, right, well, if you then understand your weaknesses, then I can understand my strengths. So my purpose for actually getting tested was ironically for my daughters, so that I knew if I had it, chances are they would have it. So if we got them, if we had to, we knew we could get them diagnosed through the schooling system. So I managed to get through the schooling system, and looking back, I'm like going, this makes so much sense now. There's so many black spots that basically should have got picked up, didn't, and it's shoulda, coulda, woulda. I'm not sort of saying it's failing the system. So we're just in very different times now,
Yeah.
So, but that ability now, but when I started to realize actually your strengths can be your weakness, or your weakness can be your strengths, it's understanding that. So saying, right, if I'm never going to sit down and write a long email, and I'll never get any pleasure out of it, or I'll procrastinate, I'll take ages. So then I'll go, well, I have no problem speaking. So what I'll do is I'll use dictation software. I will use a PA or VA. I will, I'll basically send a voice note. I'll do anything else. So instead of beating myself up and saying, God, you're really bad at this. You're bad at numbers. You're bad at writing. You're bad at reading. And all these things, instead of saying, no, I'll tell you what I am really good at. I'm really creative. I'm very strategic. I'm bloody hardworking, and I can see things that others can't. And it's interesting. You talk about blueprints and seeing, before the show, and we were talking, and I can see a set of plans, and I can immediately 3D visualize those in my head. I can walk around. Someone can show me a set of, plans and what's going on. And I can, like I say, walk through that. I can then sort of almost see how we could expand it, improve it, change it. And that just happens in my head naturally, because which is quite common with people who have ADHD, dyslexia, etc. We're massively creative. And throw on top of that is actually I'm quite intuitive as well. So
That's an impressive skill, because that took me maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 projects into reading blueprints before I could see it on paper and be like, we're going to have a problem here because of X, Y, and Z. But when I looked at it the first time, it was literally just a bunch of lines and a bunch of numbers. And I'm thinking it's going to be a house when it's done. So
yeah.
that skill, that spatial recognition just in your head to see it that's impressive.
But listen, there's a beautiful clue there in terms of that's your life, right? When you can visualize, you can imagine, visualize, dream. When you can do that is because you're saying, what's the perfect scenario here? Can I walk around this perfect goal, this perfect house, or this, this development? How can I take it in my head? And the usual thing is, if you can see it in your mind, you can hold it in your hand. And that's the point, is actually you then sort of work from the actual thing that has been completed, fulfilled. So those projects, you say, what is the end goal here? And then you can work back and asking your mind, your imagination, and using that and saying, well, here's what I want to see. This is what I want it to feel like. Here's, and I do this with so many projects now. Before anyone's gone anywhere near it, I can tell you what it's going to look like, what's going to be the floor color, what's going to be the kitchen type, what's going to be going on here. And I literally can walk all the way through that in my head. And that makes it super clear then. It's not a case of going, what are we going to do? It's like, well, we'll try this or try that. It's like, no. Here's a list of what's going to happen. It's really quite clear, So that, as you said, it is a skill. It's a muscle. This is not a red pill, blue pill situation. It's like, oh, I took it. There we go. I'm now fixed. Same with reading. I despite being dyslexic, I run a reading group. So 5:45 every morning I'm up. We have a reading group and going through, because it's a beautiful discipline. Reading is my weakness. So what do? I basically set up a reading group, so that I know every morning we're going to read 10 pages. That doesn't sound like much, but you do that 5 days a week, and you're rattling through, a couple of books, quite often a couple of books a month.
Yep.
So knowing your weakness, knowing your strengths, deciding what to do, what works, what doesn't work. These are all beautiful things and opportunities we all have, because they are opportunities.
Yeah.
And just bearing in mind, everything, the good and the bad in your life, has all been manifested. It's all been decided. When people say, I can't do this, it's like, you're probably right.
I tell that to my son all the time. I can't do it. Yeah, you're right. And they look at me like, what? And I was like, well, you just told yourself you can't. You probably can't do it then.
Yeah.
He's starting to catch on now, so he doesn't say I can't anymore, but I've worn it out.
Yeah, that's it. Well, there's no such word as can't. That's the thing, so straight away. It's language. I'm big into language, and that's so a very long answer to your question, really how the book came about. So I launched the Fire in the Belly podcast because it was a beautiful way to talk to people. We ended up every time having, the show, typically we're anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, maybe even longer in each episode. So we get to hear about people's journeys. And I started that, and we've done over 400 interviews. I think we've launched about 230 odd episodes. But to me, it was just like a guilty pleasure, because ironically, the property was working almost automatically. The property generally, it actually works better when I'm not involved. Sounds strange, but it's that's the beauty of the system, happy to share more about that. But really, we ended up with so much content, but actually without even the content, and the people share some amazing stuff and information they've learned. The key thing I was sort of saying is there, that's the point in the title of the book, is be heard to be rich. Listen to your inner genius. And that's the one thing I've sort of said is, like, bearing in mind, you're made up of 7.2 trillion cells. There's so many things inside you. And that's of any of those 7.2 trillion cells, you could isolate any one of them. They have, inside of that cell has the capability to become another version of what it is, or to create a new human. We've all come from 2 cells, a sperm and an egg. 2 cells become one, and that's the thing. So we've come from 1 cell to become 7.2 trillion cells. So people sort of say, oh, who am I? I'm nothing. And it's like, no, you've got it totally wrong. You're everything. And
Yeah.
that's the difference. And so when that's what I wanted to do is get across in the book. And again, it's ironic. And I share that some people say to write a book, you lock yourself in a dark room and you start to write and away you go. That's not me. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
So what I found is I've no problems using the hole in the front of my face, my mouth. So I'll talk. We talk on average 10,000 words an hour, whenever we're in what I call flow state. So I talk my book. I literally
I use
work
the
with a
same
writer.
analogy, flow state.
Yeah. And it's beautiful. And
Mm-hmm.
literally that's it. So, I mean, and I now, ironically, I help people write their books as well. It's like, because you go into flow state, you do that and you ask the right questions and people will tell you and they'll hit their natural vibe,
Yeah.
and you do that. So the book was all about that, what I started to see in terms of, how to listen, and not just listen in terms of what's going on, listen to the language, the tone, the energy, the unanswered question, the answered question, how
Yep.
you've actually changed tenses, how I refer to myself. So I call myself I, me, myself, we.
Yeah.
When we switch tenses like that, quite often we're referring to different parts of our lives. So it's my observations. That's what the book was all about in terms of how you do that. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that people come onto the show and they say, listen, it's the deepest show I've ever done. I've learned things about myself I hadn't intended. We get a huge spoil rate. I call it spoil rate. There are episodes that will never go live. And literally we've like over a third of the shows.
Because it
Simply
gets too deep, too emotional
too
for
emotional.
public to
Yeah.
even.
Yeah. And there's quite often there's times you're saying it's either too emotional. They end up chatting. It's like, it's a bit like this. It feels like
Yeah.
we're just chatting to a friend. We forget it, the record button's on, and that's what I say. But that's my intention for the show is actually, and it's my intention is to have a beautiful conversation. If everything permits, then we will release the episode as a show. But actually, that's secondary. The main thing is to have this beautiful conversation. So we
Yeah.
always hold it in a safe space and saying, listen, we don't do anything for the next 3 days. And if you wake up tomorrow morning and going, that's great, but the world's not ready to hear what I've said yet, that's cool. We put it on
Yeah.
ice, we put it there, or vice versa. I've said to more people and saying, listen, we're not doing your journey any respect. Actually, this needs to be a book. This needs to be a program. This is sitting right here. And what we'll do is we'll make sure and either help you get ready and then release the episode at the right time, or hold it off, or just get the episode transcribed. And that's a bump start to you writing your book, So
Yeah.
that's where the intuitive side
I
comes
love
in.
that philosophy on it. I was like deep down through college, what started my whole fascination on mindset and education was going into the psychology program. When I took psychology as a major, as my second major, I was like, I'm going into sports psychology. I'm getting my master's. I'm going to do my doctorate. Obviously, my life changed, had a son, timing didn't work out. So all that kind of went in the back burner. But my desire and my fascination with mindset in the brain and how it operates hasn't subsided at all. So the books that I'm reading, like things that you're pulling out, I'm like, okay, I read that in Limitless. I read that in this book. I'm reading a book, Profit First, right now, that a lot of the mentality is about you like working harder. And then you finally flip the page and you're like, I'm just going to work more efficiently, is stuff that he's talking about. And I do wish that more people felt, I don't know, more comfortable speaking on their struggles. Because when people ask me, I've got no problem sharing them. I'm struggling with this right now. Because the worst thing that happens is they think that I'm as real as they are. And two, maybe they could help. You never know unless you ask. So like, I'm struggling with finding steel right now. And they're like, oh, what is that from? And I'm like, well, we had to redo this house and this is where we're at. So I need steel. And I've got no problem sharing struggles. I know that your show probably gets way, way deeper in terms of like internal struggles or holdups. But I think that vulnerability, brings out something in people and they learn more about themselves. And I don't even think you need to give them necessarily an answer. But just to hear somebody speak out what they've wanted to say, but no one's actually asked them to hear it, I think is a very cool avenue that you've created in that one.
Oh, thank you. I mean, but everyone's truth is their own.
Mm-hmm.
So the struggle you have today is your struggle, and it's not, my struggle is my struggle. It's all different, and it does change through our lifetime. So if steel is today's topic, then so be it. If it's something else, it is. But it's all, a lot of it's how we look at it. How often do we take it personal? It's like, it always happens to me. Why do I always have this? And it's like, actually, maybe it's actually happening for you. Just think of
Yeah.
that. I mean, there's that expression, sometimes good things don't happen so that great things can.
Yep.
Because I know with property, I get it. Listen, there's times when you're banging your head off the wall and going, this should have been done in 2 days, and yet we're sitting 6 months later.
Yep.
And I know even part of my strategy was that I couldn't, for my own mental health. I mean, I couldn't put that on a critical path that basically to put my future, my family in jeopardy. I've always had to hold it at arm's length. I've always had to build in enough safety factor, risk factor, sort of contingency that actually I can, from a distance, and saying, listen, if it all goes great, fantastic. If it all goes bad, here's the options. Here's what's going to happen. And I can sit, and it's always at arm's length. So it's never going to, cause me problems in terms of putting food on the table. I see so many people, and they're involved, so personally involved, they're mentally involved, financially involved, and then someone does something happens, something changes, somebody says something, doesn't say something, and suddenly it's like you take it personal, and it's like they
Mm-hmm.
said they were going to do this and they didn't, and it's like they've just put my whole family in jeopardy. It's like, do you know what? Wake up, Buttercup. You put yourself in jeopardy. You allowed yourself to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
And that's taking responsibility for it and saying, nah, you allowed it to happen, and it's hard. That's a hard one to hear.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is saying every investment, every property is risky. It's a
Yep.
beautiful asset that's, compounds, it does amazing things. And, that's the one thing, property has been the one consistent thing in my life. And, I love it. And I will always invest in property, but at the same time, I'm under no illusions. If I became a billionaire in the morning, would I have property? No, I don't. I'm using property as a tool. It's what
Yep.
I'm good at. It's in the if you ever look into the likes of Ikigai, it's what I'm good at. It's not what I'm passionate about. It's what I'm good at.
Yep.
I know how to use it. I know how to leverage it. I know how to, compound it. You said earlier, sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. Believe me, I'm a walking strategy of doing nothing. How sometimes that is the best thing you can do. You
Yep.
know, um, so that's, there's so many amazing things that it can teach you, but the mindset is huge. And the number of times I see people and they panic or something goes on, and that's when, really sort of taking your time and looking at your decisions, looking at your upside, your downside, and taking a strategic view as opposed to panicking. It's a game changer, total game
Yeah.
changer.
Yeah. I like what you were saying before about obviously knowing your weakness. It's amazing how much a person would grow if they could fully admit and see where their weakness is. Because I felt, and I don't know if it's just because my past coming from athletics, no one wants to admit their weakness in athletics. But when people ask me like, "Oh, you played baseball," and I said, "Yeah, I played." Now I put this in quotes because it's not really professional. Like I didn't play Major League Baseball, but I did get compensation. So I would say like semi-pro. And they were like, "Oh, okay. So why didn't you make it?" And I was like, "Because I couldn't control my off speed. I couldn't control my changeup, and I couldn't control my curveball. I could throw it for a strike, but if you're talking major league level and where I
Hmm.
was at in terms of controlling that, I just wasn't there, and that was my thing. The velocity being a lefty, yeah, that's okay, but like I know my weakness was there. I was working on that. I just never got to the level where I needed to. And for me to understand my weakness, I know where it was, and I'm grateful for where baseball took me. And I think all of that understanding of myself and where I could push myself and where I could kind of, I always call it poke. Like I poke my weaknesses to see how much I'm going to push back on them. So I'm going to put it back in that baseball reference, if I had a good count and I wanted to throw a specific off-speed pitch and it was a safe situation, I'd push myself to throw it. Even knowing in my head it was a weakness, trying to block that out and just focus on, like, I know where I'm at. I know my skill level. I know I can do it. Just let your body do it. And you get comfortable and comfortable. And now I take that into real estate. The first house I built from scratch, I didn't know what I was doing, but I've got the instructions. I've followed instructions before. And obviously there's builders and all that, people I can lean on, but it's my weakness that I need to come over. So I'm going to take on the weakness. I'm going to stretch out, let people know this is my first time. I'm going to need help. They were more than willing to help. And now my weakness is a lesser of my weakness. It's still not up where my strengths are, but I'm not at square one. But I wouldn't have built that knowledge if I didn't poke my weakness.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a beautiful way of looking at it. It's, I mean, I would argue, who says it's a weakness, but I think the overall thing there for me is, like, it's always become, a raving amateur. That's the one thing, and saying, I don't know if I'll ever become professional. I mean, I'm 21 years in property and I learn something every day. Everyone I speak to can teach me something. But by accepting the title of, and if you follow, the sort of the 10,000 hour rule, it's like, even I'm, like, say 20 years, and I'm probably only just starting to get it to halfway towards my 10,000 hour rule to becoming an expert.
Yeah.
But really by being a raving amateur means that I hit it with energy. I decide that actually I'm going to turn up, I'm going to make mistakes, but you know what? My intention's good. My goals, my ideas are solid. Does it work out? No, but you know what? I'm willing to sort of say, we committed. Do you know what? Wasn't the best idea, that one. And that's the beautiful thing about making a mistake, is guaranteed the next time you won't make it, or you will.
That is true.
That's, you're sort of saying, great, I'm closer to not making that mistake next time. I'm closer to, that's taught me, all these experiences have meant that the big one or the next deal that's coming up, it means I'm able to wipe out all the mistakes that I made before. So suddenly it's like, now this is why I am fit for the next project, because the stuff that could trip me up, I've done that. I've sort of burnt those off in the small projects or the previous ones. So I'm ready for the next one. So it's realizing that actually your journey is, it's out there, it's ahead of you, and all these things, all these experiences you're going through is basically like ticking this checklist and this sort of underside, we've got to fill all the boxes to get us ready for the thing that we love, the thing that we, is going to change our lives in whatever way, shape or form. We're moving closer to our passion, our purpose, and saying, this is all just one big exercise. Yep. Whether you succeeded or if you view that you succeeded or you view that you failed, it is what it is. And like I say, it's just getting you ready for something else in life.
Yeah. The process is I know everybody speaks on, I don't know if you watch NBA, but Joel Embiid always says, trust the process. And I feel like it's been oversaid now, but the process is really what it's at. I don't think I'll ever know everything about real estate. And if I do, I'm mistaken, because there are experts way smarter than me that have been in it for decades and decades longer, and they're still learning. The first thing that I learned when I got into real estate was, if you wait until you're comfortable or you think you know everything, you've just wasted so much time and you'll probably never get started. So then I was like, okay, they're telling me just to jump in. Let's jump in. And I just took off with it. So that was one thing that set out, was that process thing. I don't know everything. I'm comfortable not knowing everything. If I don't know it, I'm comfortable going to find the answer. But otherwise, I'm just trusting the process, that we're doing it correctly, and you do your checks and balances to make sure you're not going too far off. And I like that philosophy. I really do.
I mean, especially with property, and it's the same with everything in life. Is just because it's big doesn't mean it's beautiful. Same with life. Just because you're drilling a 80-hour a week doesn't mean you're better. In fact, quite often it might mean you're worse. And it's not. I mean, it's not. There's no such thing as worse, but it's just subjective, right? It's what's right for you. I've got to the stage in my life, I couldn't physically work any harder. In fact, and for me to grow, I needed to work harder. And it's like, there's something not right here. There's people who have achieved far more than me and yet working far less than me. So for me to actually admit to myself and saying my formula was wrong, it's like I've done well. And this is the weird thing too, is because, people sort of think, you've got it sorted or you've got all this. And it's like, some things I do, yeah, but there's other things. It's like, no, I'm well off the mark, and getting them, sitting down around the table with the likes of Grant Cardone, and it was a funny thing. I mean, I don't mind sharing one of my big goals is 1,000 properties to have in my portfolio, and I shared this with Grant, and he was so saying to me, he's like, "Oh, is that this year?" And I'm like, "No, that's my lifetime." He's like, "Oh man, you should be ashamed." And in that one moment, I got more insight into that. And it's like, I'm just thinking on the wrong level here. I was thinking 1,000 properties in my lifetime. And he's saying, in 1 year, it's like, Jesus, what do I do with that? There's so many people who go, oh, 1,000 properties. How could you do that? Or whatever. And it's like, never take advice for someone that hasn't either done it or is doing it. Because mentors will never run you down. They'll always help you up or guide you the best that they can, or they'll never speak bad of you. And that's the one thing. So coming out of that meeting, that was one of the things, sitting with Grant and doing that. And that's just absolute belief and certainty. And bearing in mind, the bigger the deals, the harder the deals, whatever it is, the air gets thinner. It means there's less people that can do it. It means there's less, competition. There's more people that actually, really can't bid on it. Pricing gets better. You start to scale. You get, opportunities that other people don't, and it's always interesting. I've done some deals where the finance cost is horrendous, and it's like, I'm borrowing money there at even at, 10% plus. And it's, you kind of going, this is not viable. And it's like, but it is, because of the upside is there. And it allows me to do a deal that people can't do. Then it's a perfect deal. That's just the cost of doing business. People forget that. And they take it personal. That's a crazy loan. It's like, well, yeah, but if that allows me to do a deal, I mean, I bought property and, there was problems with the title, problem with the legal documents of the building. But we knew, and the solicitor knew he could get it sort of very quickly. But the problem is the average financer didn't want anything to do with it. So we had to go slightly, and pay more for the money. But it allowed us to do the deal. And then once we had all the legal paperwork lined up, then suddenly the value of the property shot up. Suddenly that cheap money, or that expensive money, looked cheap because it had facilitated a deal that suddenly now capitalized and end up with amazing value. We were able to go back into the market, get very cheap finance on it. We had a huge amount of equity built in because we had solved the problem. And that's a lot of what real estate is solving problems.
It is.
It's, how do you get it? You got a steel shortage? It's like, well, actually, no, there's no shortage of steel in the world. Same with money. There's never been more money in the world. The question is, who's got it?
Right.
Grant Carter, he's a great one for that. Who's got my money? There's no shortage. It's just, it's in the wrong place. And that's what you need to ask. How do I get,
I would think Grant Cardone, obviously he said that to you about why isn't that this year? Grant Cardone, to my knowledge, doesn't have more time in the day. So it's not like he's got more hours or more work ethic than you.
Yeah.
That's just his passion, and that's his mindset. If he wants to get it done, he gets it done. I would be surprised if that wasn't his mindset starting out. If he wasn't just the absolute go-getter, I'm going to do this. I'm going to picture it in my head, and it's going to be in my hand in a little bit. Obviously, it develops a little bit, but you got to have a baseline. I'm sure he had that baseline when he started.
It's the same with all of this. Now Grant's, Scientology is one of his things, law of attraction. It's big in any of the high performers, and you'll know this from athletics and any of those. They are big into mindset. It is just everything you could think of: law of attraction, reading, skill set, mindset, emotional intelligence, intuition. And it's like they are driving because you need that sort of edge of performance. And this
Yeah.
to me is the difference between you can motivate somebody, and that's great for a short time. You can inspire somebody, and maybe that's great for a longer time. But those are very short term, and they need energy. The difference is then if you transform somebody, that's transformation is game changing, because you
Hmm.
have changed basically their DNA. You've changed how they act and feel every day of the week. Because when the shit starts coming down, when suddenly, as you say, it's almost like the world's against me, I can't get steel, laborers let me down, contractors aren't turning up, people are changing their prices, the legal guys, attorneys are messing up, whatever's happening. And it's so easy for the mindset to go, poor me. Why me? Why me?
Yeah.
And it's like, don't flatter yourself. It's nothing to
Right.
do with you.
Right.
It's a
It
story.
it reminds me of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. The extrinsic motivation will get you going. It will carry you through the day. The inspiration might carry you through the week, the month. But that internal motivation where you've got, like your book, the fire inside of you, that's going to take that's your train that's not going to stop. So if you can somehow, and that was my fascination, if you could get into somebody's head and light that fire, find out whatever inside them motivated them to do whatever. If they wanted to get into an industry that I knew nothing about, if they wanted to get into, I'm saying shoes because I'm wearing Crocs right now. So if they wanted to get into the shoe business, I know nothing about shoes. I couldn't evaluate shoes, couldn't tell you brands, couldn't tell you prices. But if they wanted to get into shoes, I want to get like inside the person and talk and like find out what motivates them so they can be passionate enough and that is what they want to do. And I'm just equating it to your ignite the fire philosophy on that one. But I want to touch a little bit. What is that? Sorry.
No, I think it's a core belief for me. I genuinely believe if as long as you've got a beat in your heart and a breath in your lung, is you have a fire in your belly. And that's the thing. It's just, people forget that, and it's always there, and all your ideas and your truth are all within you. You don't need extra courses. You don't need all this. It's already in there. Now, what it takes is confidence to get it out. But it's down to that. It's understanding that, I've spoken to people who are having, in their darkest hour, and I've spoken to people who are at the top of their game. And that's the difference. It's knowing that actually that secret recipe, that secret fire in your belly is within you, so it's just a case of, how big is my flame right now?
Yeah.
So that belief in yourself and that belief in who you are and what you do, that's key.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited to get the book. I'm excited to read it. I'm sure I'm going to take a lot of nuggets out of it. I'll sit there with my Sharpie, or not my Sharpie, my highlighter, and go through. But before we go, because we only have like 10 more minutes until we got to cut out, I try to limit it to an hour. But we've had guests on before. So if we don't get to everything real estate, which I don't think we will in 10 minutes, we'll have to get you back to talk more real estate focus. But what was going on with your first deal? Where were you? How did it come about? How did you find out about it? What convinced you to pull the trigger on it and say like, yep, I'm doing this?
Super simple.
Super simple. I'm excited to hear this.
20 years of age. I always, as a kid, I always loved Monopoly. Okay, this sounds really basic, but when I looked, and it was through family that basically a friend of my sister's basically was a property up for sale, and I got curious. There is some investors in our family, so there was a bit of background, and I understood it. But I quickly sat down with this property and I looked at it, and it's very typical for my sort of profile of investing. But I looked at, took it and saying, well, it can be rented out for X. Like, what's my bills? So I then said, well, the mortgage is this. My downside is if the tenant leaves, my costs for insurance, for agents, for all that, and here it is. So if I do nothing more than, rent it for, at the time it would have been, so the equivalent of about $600 a month. all my costs were coming in at like $350 equivalent. Excuse me. So all the time it was rented, it was great. And then I sort of said, well, what can happen? The tenant can leave. I could potentially never get a tenant back in for whatever reason. So if I can afford to bear that, the base cost, then, that's okay. I can live with that. That's the risk. That's my downside. But that's, I bought that 21 years ago and I still have that to this day. It's the same tenant. They've never left. The rent
After
is just
21 years.
crept. Yeah, 21 years.
So
So
that is the investor's dream, is to have one good tenant for as long as you can.
it's a dream, but sometimes then you buy the right profile of properties and tenants will never leave. It's not quite often. It's not that people are saying, oh, it's finding the right investor. It's like, we'll find the right investment,
Right.
and then the tenant will always stay. I have some of the best standards of property. So it sounds strange. I mean, I will have property in the street. That's maybe there could be 100 houses on the street. Mine will be probably the most energy efficient house. Okay. Mm-hmm. And people go, why would you do that? I'm saying, well, I want my tenant to live in something that's a really good standard. I want them to know that they've got one of the best houses in the street. I want it to be the cheapest house for them to run. So whenever it comes to people saying, would you think of moving? It's like, why would I move? In fact, there's nothing comparable. I'm spoiled here.
Yeah.
And so by reinvesting, and I want that property, because the other thing is, like with any risk, I'm not bulletproof like anyone else. I want to say, if I had to have a fire sale, I would want that property to be in the best condition when it hit the market so that I can maximize the value. If I had to pull the trigger tomorrow for whatever reason and I needed to get rid of it quick, this is not a rundown hovel that I'm just trying to flog and take anything for. This is kind of going, this is mid to high level in terms of its standard. Its quality's there. I know investors are going to come in and see it and run the numbers and go, this is a no-brainer. And if it's a no-brainer, then yeah, you maximize your price. So at all point, I mean, the value of my estate is it's pointless talking about. It means nothing till the day you sell. So people, because the ego steps in and go, what are you worth? And it's like, well, I'm worth nothing until the day I sell. It's just, for now, it's just figures and numbers on a page, but and that's the one thing. But I'm on a buy and die strategy anyway. So my thing is, I'm quite happy to have that tenant staying for 21 years and staying for another 21 years, because, if I'm sitting there making $200, $300, $400 a month off that property, and some people say, do you know what, is it really worth the hassle? And it's like, well, that's a particularly good one. It's been there, but people forget about the compound effect, and saying, right, well, for $300 a month, people say, why would you do it? And saying, right, well, okay, fair enough, good point, and it's like the risk and all the rest, and saying, well, how would you feel if you had 5 of them, and you had 5 $300 a month, $1,500 a month, and then people go, God, the stress and all that, and it's like, well, no, it's easier now because of scale. I now have more agents. I have another PA that does all the stuff, and then saying, well, if I had 5, why not just have 50? And then I could have $15,000 a month coming in, and that's pretty much how this all came about.
Yeah.
People sort of almost try to maximize one property and then they take it personal when the tenant leaves. I build into my figures that actually I'm going to lose a month's rent every year for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And if it happens, it's like, yeah, that's cool. If it doesn't happen, oh, that's even cool. We have a bit more in the pot. But then we'll do saying, right, well, we have a service strategy. So everything has a lifespan. The building has a lifespan. The tenant has a lifespan. The boiler, the windows, everything has a lifespan. People, when they're doing investments, they take it personal and they're going, the boiler quit. It's like, yeah, well, that's predictable. Yeah. And it's like, so we have a 3 strikes and it's out policy. I'll go out and send an engineer out once, maybe twice. Third time it's out, it's gone. And I'll get the new product in and it's got a 10-year warranty. And, so we always have this mindset of, instead of trying to do it on a shoestring, and saying, no, we have budgeted for this. We have capitalized for this. We know what's coming. And it's like, I know, because plumbers and fitters now know that if they get a phone call from me, it's done. It's like, I want a new boiler in and I know the pricing and it's in, and they know they'll be paid that day, and it's being decisive, being clear, It's nothing personal. The boiler didn't break down to upset you and give you a bad year and a bad day or whatever. It's
Right.
more for you. You haven't planned. You haven't been strategic.
Yep.
So it's some of the things I see with property. People come in and take it personal, and then they try and manage the tenant themselves, and they do all this, and then tenants do what tenants do, and sometimes if it's badly managed, then the tenant's badly managed, and you rent to the wrong person or whatever it is, and the tone is set, and
Yeah.
then it starts upsetting people, and they're going, "Why would you do this?" It's going, "You're looking at it from a passion point of view. I'm looking at it from a business perspective."
And that's a good way to say it. Because there's a lot of people that talk to me and they're like, so if the toilet breaks at 2, you have to go fix it? Maybe. They're like, what do you mean maybe? And I was like, I've got plumbers that would probably take the call and I could pay to go do that, and then I'd go back to bed. Like, well, I don't have money for that. I'm like, well, if you factor that into your cash flow, then you do have money for that. So everything is there. You just have to schedule it and kind of see what's going to happen. Windows are going to fail. Water heaters are going to fail. Furnaces are going to fail. So allot your whatever percentage per month into your rainy day fund. And then when it happens, you take the phone call. I remember I was out with my friends this summer, and we just had a tenant move in. We just renovated this place, put the new water heater in, and the tenants called like, hey, we don't have hot water. And I was like, okay, give me 10 minutes. Hung up. I called the plumber. It's like, hey, water heater broke. Would you be able to replace that for me? He said, yep, I'll be out tomorrow. Called him back. Said, the plumber's going to be there tomorrow. Is there anything you can do? Do you need hot water? Your parents live nearby. What can I do? And they're like, oh, we'll be fine. So I just hung up and went back to what we were doing. And I got berated with questions about like, oh my God, the water heater went out? And I said, yep, just like a water heater would do. I mean, I bought an old property, so it was an old water heater. They're like, how much does that cost? And I was like, I have no idea, but they roughly are in this price. I'm going to see what the plumber says. But this plumber that I've worked with, obviously with all of these things, I kind of know what price point. And the thing that I've set up is if it's under X amount of dollar amount, they just do it right away. And if it's over, they have to get the clearance from me. So when he basically said he'll be there and didn't send me an invoice, it was going to be under that threshold. I was comfortable with it. The money was already saved up for it. So went and did it. And those are things that, I mean, the water heater didn't do it on purpose. It was just the day, and the solenoid went out. So quick replacement, a flush and a replacement, and we were good. $150. I'm not going to lose my day over $150.
And that's the difference between a thriving entrepreneur and and it's super interesting. And Grant talks about, loads of people talk about it. It's the difference between a billionaire mindset and a millionaire mindset. Millionaire mindset, and most people will be a millionaire through their lifetime in terms of what they earn and what they do, through house prices and whatever else. But they will all be of a scarcity mindset. Oh my God, that broke, that happened. It's like, it's happened for me. It's genuinely happened for me. If I can see the good part of this, is I learned to speak to my plumber. I learned to actually set these systems in place. I learned to have these processes. I learned to get stressed, but then release the stress. I learned how to move things on and get over problems. And that's beautiful, because the air is cleaner up there, because the average person is saying, I can't cope. It's like, that's fine. That's good, because thank you. Just leave the field wide open for me.
Right.
Because, where you see the problem, I'm kind of going, if I fix this, this, and this, then I've got a clear run. And everyone else is going, oh my God, how can you do it? And it's like, there's no problem.
Yeah. I mean, and that was a more complicated situation, because since then I've obviously set up processes, and now I've got a CRM that literally has a vacation mode. So I have all my contractors in, I flip a switch, and while that switch is on, I won't get a phone call. If the tenants call, they'll call my CRM. They will call my contractor. My contract will go. All I do is pay the bill. So if I really wanted to be completely hands off, I could forever. Obviously, I don't want to, but that goes into purchasing, and you set up that property management percentage. And this is something that I might have learned from Grant, or at least on that Bigger Pockets podcast where I heard him. They said, always buy your property like somebody else. You're going to have to pay somebody else to manage it, even if you do it yourself, because you cannot manage one property forever. When you've got 1,000, you can't focus on one. So you're going to have to set up a buffer for property management. So I went in, oddly enough, I went in buying this property, knowing I was going to tear it down in less than 10 years. And knowing that I put in a buffer for property management already, even though I was doing it myself. So I definitely sleep easier knowing that I've not thought through every situation, but a majority of situations already thought through.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, a lot of that's putting a value on your time. People don't do that. People don't put a value in saying, you know, I know for me, it's like, I have a value per hour. And it's like, as you say, it's whether it's a plumber or somebody else, it's like, that why would I do, it's the old thing of why would I have a dog and bark myself? It's like I have a dollar amount, and I would be saying to myself, I'll be sitting there on average about $1,000 an hour. It's like any task that's can be done for less than $1,000 an hour, give it out. Don't do it. And it's, could I do it myself? Yeah, maybe. My ego says I could, and I could save this and do this. And it's going, yeah, but then you're not spending time with the kids, or you're not thinking strategically, or you're getting stressed, or you're putting miles on the car, or you're running around, or and there's all these things. Whereas because every property is an asset, my book is an asset, I'm an asset, every talk I do, every program I write, every mentee that I have, they're all assets, different assets. I always believe you should have at least 9 asset classes in your life and in your portfolio. Some will be static, some will be long term. Some will be emotional assets, some will be financial, some will be energetic assets, and until you learn how to basically have multiple assets in growth at the same time, you will always have a job. You'll always have it, and I've seen so many investments in so many properties that it's not an asset, it's a job, or it's a really sort of twisted saving scheme in that it's costing them more, and people justify that they spend a few, cost them a few pounds each month. And it's like, no, that's a saving scheme. That's not growing. That's a saving scheme, and people don't know the numbers, and they just hope and they think, and, but anyway, it's a whole new topic, but it's awesome.
Yeah. That 10X was, there's many different parts in my real estate career that I can pick out. And oddly enough, it gets aligned with a book. And that 10X book hit right when I was in an impasse of, I was trying to carry my full-time job, but get into real estate. And I was trying to do both. And I was finding myself not doing both well. Like, if I'm doing something, I want to do it well. And I found myself doing both, but not well. So something had to go. And as I'm reading that book, he talks about how he could do it, but does he have to? And I think the one that he was talking about was the dishes and cleaning his house. I can definitely do the dishes and I can definitely clean my house. And this is where I was, like, I didn't want a cleaning person because I can do the dishes and I can clean my house. But he was like, I could then have a meeting while someone is cleaning my house where I could make 10 times that and pay the person to do it. And I was like, oh yeah, he has a point. I'm wrong. And I'll humbly say I was wrong in the philosophy on that one. And that's when it just expanded my mind. It was like, okay, so I shouldn't do these things. Even though I can, I shouldn't. And now it's battling in my ego where I'm not on the job site every day. So I'm not with the crew and I'm not with the guys that started. Now I'm doing other things. And now that's hard for me. But I shouldn't be there because I need to do these other things. Or I guess I don't need to. I have the ability to do them, which will benefit the group of guys that we've got running with us. So constant battles, but definitely fun. I would not trade it for a world. With all the struggles and the hard days that I have and the frustrations and the hiccups, I don't want to do anything else.
Yeah. But it's, even the language there, it's saying constant battle. It's not, it's constant opportunities.
I got to change that.
It's
change that.
And it is that thing. It's like going, wow, I get to learn about this today. It's nothing personal. That didn't break. It's going, wow, I get to learn. And then this might actually come in really useful down the line when I'm negotiating something or doing something or whatever. I understand now why this is easy or difficult or harder or expensive or whatever. Every opportunity. And I talk to everyone. Everyone can teach you something. I genuinely
Yes.
believe that. And if you take the time long enough to actually listen, now you may learn that I never want to talk to that person again. They may teach you that, or they may teach you something that's actually, it gets you a chance to put something into action, or a technique that they use, or why something is better, or what's the best, in the plumbing world, what's the best, of the plumbers, or the techniques or the materials or whatever, and everything. And you just get little nuggets, and all the time you're building on that. Same with these podcasts. That's the whole point. You take little nuggets from each guest, from each person. You're getting better. Every asset, every property, you learn something new. And they're all lining up for something that's due to happen in the future. So this is just all sort of experience building up for you. So
Yeah.
great experience.
Yeah. I'm excited to gain on my experience. I'm going to read your book. As soon as I get off this podcast, I'm ordering the book, because I'm liking exactly what you're saying. I think it's aligning with how I'm thinking. And I may not have the words for it, but I like what you're thinking. So I definitely recommend it. Hopefully our listeners will do that too. We will add a link. Can you buy it on Amazon?
Yeah, so on Amazon
Okay.
all around the world. So we hit bestseller status. So it's been fantastic. Mark Victor Hansen's endorsed it, so it's there. So Be Heard to Be Rich, Listen to Your Inner Genius by myself, Mighty Pete. So it's out there now. It's available. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, we will definitely add that into the show notes. Is your email the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Probably the website's the easiest way. So mightypete.com. So
Okay.
there you can access in terms of the podcast, the book, the mentoring programs, what's going on. So about me, the whole thing. So yeah, it's mightypete.com. Super simple. Couldn't, let people go and find out and learn more.
Awesome. Is your TED talk on there as well?
Yeah, so I think we have a link to it, so it's there. If not, you just jump on. You can just jump on YouTube, and again, just my name. So it's under either Mighty Pete or Pete Lonton, Lonton. So it's there, and but I'll make sure it's in the show notes as well, so you can see that as well.
Awesome.
It's about why you need to listen to yourself. So people are always looking for experience and authentication from those around them, when actually that all needs to come from within them. And it's it took me a lifetime to realize that.
Yeah. I think it's great you come into, I'm not trying to change you. I'm not trying to shove stuff down your throat. It's in you. We just got to go find it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's it. That's it. If you want to transform, you can motivate for a while, but like I say, it's transformation is a different thing. But the language people use, the tone they have, the way they set, like I say, I'm big into words and what people say and how they say it. So you listen to what you're saying and what's going on, and then that's the thing. You will learn more about yourself than you ever knew possible. That's the key thing.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time. I'm sorry that we went over. I know your show goes a little bit longer, but the background, I kept getting yelled at by Natasha because I kept going longer, and she's like, "We got to keep these things to an hour." So I apologize, Natasha, who's not here. We went over an hour. But we'll definitely get back in touch with you, because one, I want to get a chance to read the book so we can reflect on it. And then two, kind of dive deeper more into maybe your real estate. For some of the people that did gravitate towards your message, like what you're talking about, you can kind of give them a little bit more background into the wonderful world of real estate.
Absolutely. No problem at all.
If that works for you.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Well, we will get back in touch. I'll make sure all of the information that you shared with us gets in the show notes. We'll send you a copy of the show as well. And then we'll definitely get you back on the calendar, because love the mindset. Love talking to you. I'm looking for big things. I'm going to keep following.
Yeah, it's all out there. It's all out there ahead of you and waiting for you. So well done, you.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate your time. Go have yourself a great weekend. Spend time with the kids. And we'll talk soon.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.